Today we'll be taking a look at the first generation American Standard Washbrook Urinal introduced all the way back in 1962 and was made up until circa 1981 or 82. So this is one of the first few urinals that introduced toilet-like trapway openings into their washdown urinals. Obviously other companies would follow later down the 60s, like the Ultra Correcto in 1964 and the introduction of the Crane Chromo in 1965. So this is their replacement for the standard Washal urinal for their washdown urinals. And it's not very interesting. But let's take a look at it and see what it has to offer. The overall design actually doesn't look too bad, honestly. It actually has its own style. Trapway opening, which is a first for this, is a standard lip. Let's have a look at a flush. Yeah, it's not very interesting. Let's have a look at bowl rinse. When you give it good pressure, it is pretty good, but you do notice that these two sides right here are missed because there's no rim jets to cover it, even though it's kind of designed to be kind of like it almost, except for these slants. But for the most part, it's pretty good. So back in the day, most washdown urinals typically have built-in strainers with holes. This one goes for a toilet-like trapway opening. And like I said, many other companies followed. I think this really just shows many more problems of the washdown urinal when it's exposed trap. Because these things do not hold up very good. Pretty middle of the road if you ask me. I've seen plenty of these out of order, and not to mention that sometimes the clearance can be questionable, and this is also one of those urinals you have to put on moderate pressure or slightly higher pressure in order to do its job fairly effectively, which is not a good sign. And that's all there really is to say about the first generation American Standard Washbrook urinal. Very uninteresting, and was also the catalyst for many problems that a lot of washdown urinals would have down the course of the road. This was one of the first early examples of exposed trapway urinals, and it's not a very good one. It's far from the worst, and trust me, it gets worse down the line, but still, not very special. But let's put this urinal into the grading scale. Let's grade it.
The overall design of this urinal is actually kind of simplistic if you think about it, but it does have its own style, which is quite interesting. Overall, though, I give it a 6. Yep, the flush really isn't interesting at all. It is a washdown urinal, so that's not super surprising. It's a 5. The bowl rinse for the most part is pretty good, with an abundance of rim jets covering the entire rim. Although I wish there were some rim jets towards the back corners, because there aren't any rim jets at all. Overall, the bowl rinse is pretty good. I give it an 8. So here's where things kind of start falling flat. The functionality really isn't that great. I think this is one of the very few urinals that really was the beginning of the downfall of washdown urinals. Now granted, they weren't always perfect and sometimes had problems, but even compared to something like this in some later urinals, especially modern, washdown urinals was still pretty solid for its time. But the introduction of this urinal really started a downfall. This urinal highlighted some problems that some washdown urinals have, needing a good bit of pressure, but not too much and not too little. Now, to mention that buildup can be kind of common with these urinals, especially if they're not taken care of. And wow, that is a lot more common on this compared to something like the standard Washal. Another issue I've been noticing with this urinal and some others is that the drainage is really slow. If there's a lot of water in the rim, it will take a while for it to drain out. Compare that to the standard Washal, which is a lot faster. This is mostly the fault of the smaller trapway opening that these have, and why this was probably not the greatest ideal. Overall, the functionality isn't horrible, but it's not great either. It's a 5. Now let's talk about the overall value of this urinal. I gotta say, this really started the downfall of urinals in an unintentional way. I think urinals like this really started exposing some of the problems of some washdown urinals. Sure, you can argue some of the past urinals like the standard Washal could have it, but those urinals are a lot more durable and hold up a lot better compared to something like this. And sure, it might have an interesting design and good bowl rinse, but it amplified a lot of problems of washdowns, and unfortunately, a lot of washdown urinals would start going downhill. The 1960s period really started a downfall of washdown urinals, and it keeps getting worse with every passing decade. Now we're pretty much beyond the bottom of the barrel at this point because most Washdown urinals absolutely suck. Sure, it's one of the better Washbrook urinals, but that's because every generation got crappier and crappier. That still doesn't excuse the fact that this urinal is still pretty meh. Compared to the standard Washal, this urinal is a complete downgrade. And it really isn't even a contest. The value is a 5. The final score of the first generation American Standard Washbrook Urinal is a 29 out of 50, which translates to a 58 out of 100. Yeah, I'm gonna be frank, this urinal really isn't that great and nothing special. I definitely think this urinal in the 1960s period was really the beginning of the downfall of washdown urinals, and it kept getting worse with every decade. It's honestly quite a shame.